Buzzle here again for our live Facebook on Fridays. And looking out the window here behind my computer, it's beautiful out. So hopefully you're going to be able to get out and enjoy this beautiful Friday and have a great weekend. When you do get out, make sure, as I've always been saying, to be very, very careful. So we're going to just talk about a quick update on some COVID statistics that are out there. Just everybody, as we return to going out and shopping and doing all the things that we did before the stay-at-home orders, just make sure that you're keeping safe. More and more people are getting out. The roads are getting congested again, so be careful on the roads, as well as make sure that you are taking the precautions that you need to for yourselves as you return back to some things that we did normally before just going out. So in looking at the Texas Medical Center, they have a nice website that gives you all the statistics on the number of cases that are testing positive, the number of hospitalizations, where they are in the projections of for the next 2 weeks, what may happen. And what they are showing right now is they are expecting an increase in the next 2 weeks, which are going to start filling up the hospital beds. And so they are on a red condition right now. Now, if the cases go down again, obviously that's going to go back to normal. Right now, they don't have any worries about the hospital situation that I can see. They are reporting a 1.2 times increase over the last week in the number of cases, positive cases that they've had. It's actually gone up about 1,700 cases. So we are also at the, as of 5/12, so May 12th is the fourth highest day since they started tracking for positive cases. So as we kind of thought this may happen, we're going to see a little bit of a surge possibly as people get back out and are interacting with each other again. So once again, do what get back to as normal as you can, but make sure that you are wearing your masks out, that you wear the gloves, that you do the hand sanitizing, that you stay away, the 6 feet rule. Still exercise all those precautions that you've been exercising. And I think that we'll all be just fine and be able to return back to normal. Now, one thing I read that was pretty interesting idea for employers is that maybe we are going to go into a 2-week cycle where we have employees in the office 4 days, followed by 10 days of stay at home. They believe that this would allow that anybody that's sick and come into contact would be at home for the majority of the period that they are ill. It's not going to be a perfect system, but it is something to start looking at. They're still suggesting to allow employees to work from home. If it's working, do it. I think you're going to have some liabilities if you start having employees come back too soon and they get sick. As far as the courts go, so they've issued that there is still no jury in Harris County until June 30th, and that may get extended again. We've gotten some guidance from the Supreme Court on reopening for the courts following June 1st. So I haven't heard of any courts that are going to be resuming normal operations prior to June 1st. After June 1st, it looks like they have to submit reports on how they are going to handle certain situations in order for them to resume normal operations. They're still suggesting that after June 1st that the courts do everything they can to hold court proceedings remotely. And they're not allowing jury trials until further guidance. And so now we know that it's actually going to go all the way through June before any juries are going to resume. So we're looking at July 1st as the first possible time that a jury trial can go forward. And before any court can hold an in-person proceeding other than the essentials hearings, and I'll tell you what those are in a minute, and they can't be conducted remotely, then there's reports that they're going to have to file with the state, letting them know or providing an operating plan where they're going to show how they're going to take precautions to ensure judge and court staff health. How the court and the buildings will coordinate scheduling to reduce occupancy in the courthouse to the lowest degree possible. How they're going to address hearings that there may be a person involved that's a vulnerable population person. And that's going to be anyone over 65 and anybody with a serious underlying health condition, such as high blood pressure, chronic lung disease, diabetes, obesity, asthma, and the list goes on and on. How they're going to ensure social distancing, how the courts will ensure that individuals will have access to hygiene products, how they're going to screen the people coming in and out of the courthouse. They're suggesting that face coverings will be worn at all times by all people in the courthouse, and how the courts are going to be clean to make sure that they're following the guidelines. Now, the essential hearings they've identified as in criminal cases, the magistration proceedings, so that's when the charges are brought, CPS removal hearings, temporary restraining orders or injunction or hearings, juvenile detention hearings, family violence protective orders, and certain mental health proceedings. Those are basically the ones that they're really saying are essential. And even the essential ones, they want to make all effort that they can to conduct them via video or telephone conference. Now, if it's going to be on a case-by-case basis for anything else, it doesn't mean that they're not hearing those cases. These are just the essential cases that would move forward in court if they can't do it by a remote means. So just a little update on that. But what I really wanted to talk to you about today is what happens. Get to my chart. So what happens when you die and you don't have a will? Well, Texas has outlined specifically what's going to happen to your belongings, and it's not always what people think. So that's why I always like to share this. So there are two types of property. You've got your separate property and you've got community property. So separate property is anything that you own prior to a marriage or anything that you received during a marriage by somebody passing away and leaving it to you or somebody giving you a gift. Then we have community property, which is basically covers any property that is accumulated during the marriage, unless it has been from somebody passing away and leaving it to you, or a gift. An allergies going on, so voice is coming in and out. So we also have personal property and real property. So real property is land and anything attached to the land. And personal property is basically everything else that you own. So the courts have outlined what happens if you die without a will. Of course, if you have a will, you get to tell exactly what you want done with your stuff. So Texas will only give it to somebody that is related to you by blood or marriage. So if you have somebody that's close to you that is not related by blood or marriage, then they would not inherit unless you have a will. That includes that child that you've raised all of their life and you consider your own child, but you've never adopted them and they were not your biological child. So obviously the will, you get to control exactly where things go. So what happens when you don't have that will and the worst case scenario happens? So the way the courts or the actually statutory law says things pass, it's kind of a convoluted system that they've come up with, but essentially they break it up into categories. So if we have a married person that has children or other descendants, so that's, I would say it goes down the line. So it's going to be children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, that way. If you have separate personal property, then 1/3 of that personal property will go to your spouse. 2/3 will go to the children equally. If you have separate real property, then children will take all ownership of the property equally, and the surviving spouse gets a 1/3 life estate. So a life estate basically means you have the right to live there for life. It also means that you pay any debts associated with that house while you are occupying the house. If you should ever move somewhere else, then the ownership of that immediately goes to the children. And then when surviving spouse passes away, they have no ability to control where that asset goes in their will, because the children will take ownership as soon as surviving spouse passes. So when we have community property, the descendants share. So if we have community property and we have children, and all of those children are also the children of surviving spouse, that means you didn't have any children from a prior relationship, then the surviving spouse receives all of the community property. If we have one child outside of that marriage, then all of the decedent share, so the person that passed away, their 1/2 share of community property goes to the children. The surviving spouse retains their share of the community property. So essentially, the surviving spouse owns the community real property when 1/2 to the surviving spouse, that they retain their community interest, and then they own the other half with the children of the person that passed. I guess that's a little bit confusing. If we have a married person that has no child or descendant, then the separate personal property will go all to the surviving spouse. If we have separate real property, it gets kind of crazy here. So if we have the person that passed is married, but there's no children, if we have a surviving mother and father of the person that passed, then they each take 1/4 of the real property, and the surviving spouse gets half. And it gets even crazier. So if there's no parents and siblings, then it's going to be divided into the siblings. If there is one surviving parent and siblings, then the surviving parent gets 1/4 and the siblings split the other 1/4, and the surviving spouse gets half. It says, and if a decedent is survived by mother or father but is not survived by any siblings, then half goes to the surviving parent and then half to the surviving spouse. So that would be a case if we have one parent surviving, there's no brothers or sisters, and then the surviving spouse and the surviving parent share ownership of that property. If we have neither parent living, but we have siblings, spouse gets their half, siblings get the other half. And if there's only in the case where there are no parents and no descendant of a sibling, then it goes all to surviving spouse. That means they will go to siblings, and then if the siblings have kids, it goes to them, and it just goes down their line unless there's nobody there. And only then will the surviving spouse inherit all of the separate property. Decedent share of community property, when we have a married person with no child, it'll go to the surviving spouse. If we have an unmarried person that have children or other descendants, then the children or the other descendants take all in equal shares. An unmarried person with no child or descendant, if they're survived by mother and father, then each parent gets half of that property. If there is one parent and siblings, the parent gets half, and the other half is split between the siblings. If this descendant is survived by mother or father but no siblings, then it all goes to the surviving parent. And if there's neither parent but have surviving siblings, then it all goes to the siblings split in equal shares. So that's just kind of a quick rundown. There are so many other situations that could happen, but the important thing to note is if your spouse passes away and there are children from a prior marriage or a prior relationship, you could end up owning property with those children. And if they're minors, obviously there's going to be some work that needs to be done with their parent. So this is going to be the ex of your current spouse or late deceased spouse. So that may not be the best situation to be in. And it can also lead to you owning property with your in-laws. Some people get along really well with their in-laws, and that wouldn't be an issue. Other people's not so much. So it's something to consider. A will doesn't take much. It's not hard. There's a lot of difficult decisions to be made, but it's something that's once it's done, it's very rewarding. You have that peace of mind. I can also tell you on the back end, when you have to probate the estate, that it becomes much more difficult and more expensive for your loved ones to have to go through the probate proceeding when there's not a will. So, best advice I can give you is get a will. Um, that way, you know exactly where your stuff is going and who is going to make sure that it gets there and that that person is somebody that you trust. So, that's all I have for this week. Just want to say go enjoy yourselves, enjoy this beautiful weather, but be safe, and we will talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.